Thanks for joining Multifamily Talks, a Real Page podcast. On this episode of the show, I'm joined by Jennifer Staciokas, president of Western Wealth Communities. Western Wealth Communities is a people-first property management company that was formed in March of 2020. Yes, the beginning of the pandemic. Our conversation explored what it was like to found a company during a lockdown, the methodologies used to build a people-first culture when people couldn't gather together, the focus on mental and physical health that Jennifer has instilled in the organization she's been a part of, and the role Stoicism plays in her daily life. And with that, let's get to the show. So Jennifer, first off, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us. It is fantastic to see you. And I want to start with a really, really hard-hitting question. What's it like to be the person in multifamily housing who has the most mispronounced last name ever?
That's a great question, and what a hard one to get started on. You know, it's when I first started dating my husband, you learn somebody's last name right on the first date, and then you don't say it for weeks, whatever, until you know this is actually going to become something. And when I needed to introduce him to my parents, I had to be very embarrassed and ask him, I don't even remember how to say your last name. But the thing that he did, and I always do it whenever I'm teaching somebody, and I know we're on a podcast, but making the choke sign. So it's Staciokas, and the I really is an H, and that makes it a lot easier for people to understand.
I've been dying to ask you that question because I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. I personally thought it was pronounced about 15 other different ways until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I learned the actual way it was pronounced. But that's...
And most people are very proud when they meet me and they think, oh, that's a great Greek name. And it's actually not. So it's disappointing when I tell people that it's not a Greek name. The only people that normally get the pronunciation right are people from Eastern Europe or former Soviet Union. So it's a Lithuanian name. My father-in-law was straight from Lithuania.
Interesting. So now we know something new about that, and I'm sure it's going to come up in every email marketing that you're going to get from salespeople who listen to the podcast. And I want to get into that at some point too, because that's been a theme recently. But before we do that, I wanted to bring you on. So when we were developing this podcast, this list, you were one of the very, very first names I put towards the top of I want to have a conversation around. Because I think both your personal story, I think, is kind of amazing to see. And I've watched it happen over the last, 13 or so years that I've known you. But also the Western Wealth Community story is amazing, quite honestly, in my opinion. So if you wouldn't mind, start with the Western Wealth Communities story as to how that came to be, especially the time frame and the environment that was done in. And then I got a bunch of questions afterwards.
Absolutely. Sure. So when I joined, it's Western Wealth Capital is the parent company, and they're the owner of the properties, the owner in the investment company. And in December of 2019, they were sitting down in their strategic meetings and said, we really are at a scale and a size where we should bring management in-house. And so December of 2019, nobody's thinking anything crazy. It just sounds like a great idea. And they had started recruiting for the position. That's how I got connected into Western Wealth and accepted the job. I think it was in February, and was set to give notice in March. And the Monday that I was set to give notice, literally the Friday before, I believe there was an NAA meeting that the week prior that everybody was cutting out early, heading home, and the world basically shut down. And I remember speaking to my husband, and I was supposed to take a little bit of time off in between. And he said, get on the payroll, right? You've already, at this point, you've given notice to your existing organization, and you said that you're going to commit to this new role. But you know what? I really think that was March of 2020 for everybody.
Not that anything happened to the world in March of 2020.
Yeah. You probably figured that out when we were talking about COVID and things shutting down, but March of 2020. And we originally were going to have about 90 days to get the management company set up and onboard the first set of 10 properties. And because of COVID, it changed the focus and it completely changed our business plan. And I had literally 28 days from the day that I joined. So I joined on March 30th, and we launched the first set of properties on April 27th of 2020. And that meant we had to set up everything. So, make sure people get paid through payroll, get our property management software set up, negotiate all of our vendors kind of on a national basis as well as a local basis, and get them up and running. So it was something where it was fast and furious. When I look back, I really don't think I slept for those 28 days and many, many months after that. But I do think that COVID presented a really unique opportunity because my first day, I didn't go into an office. I had a computer shipped to me and I was on Teams and dealing with people. But if I had been in an office, I think we would not have been able to as successfully get everything set up because I had no distraction. I was literally sitting in my bedroom in my condo and just cranking away on everything that needed to be done. Whereas if I had been sitting in an office, you have people coming in and out of your office, having more meetings about things that you really just didn't have time to meet about. So we were able to put our heads down, get the work done, and successfully, onboard those first 10 properties and set up the foundation moving forward for the management company.
So, and I shared this with you, but just for the listener's sake, I went through, I'm going to say something similar, but not really similar, but from the fact of, I came from a fully integrated shop where we brought management in-house. Just to do that in 28 days is stunning to me because it took us the better part of 18 months to truly do it. How did you approach the prioritization of what do we need to focus on? Because as you already mentioned, you said you've got systems, you've got vendor relations and vendor deliveries. We haven't even talked about people yet, what I really want to get into. How did you, it's the elephant, you get one bite at a time. How did you decide which bite you were going to do?
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing was I'm very tech savvy for those people that know me, but I do still rely on pen and paper. And for me, when I was thinking of the entire elephant that needed to be eaten, I had to write down every single thing that I knew we wanted to build in the management company so that I could really prioritize what had to happen to make management happen, and then what was nice to have and what were those things that were going to come as time comes along. And, this industry is really amazing, right? We have such great relationships that we build. And I had so many people when they heard I was building a management company reach out and they wanted me to roll out their solution.
Sure.
And I had to be, I had to be very direct with people, which I normally am, and just tell them now is not the time. You're on my roadmap, but today it does not make sense to focus on this nice to have product or service. And so when I think about what were those essential things, I had to have my PMS up and running because that is the hub of all things. I needed to get my websites up and running and make sure that they fed into the PMS seamlessly. We had to make sure that our employees got paid. And I had to have all of my maintenance contracts negotiated, landscaping, pest control, all of those things that you need to just work, to have a property work. And then we started focusing too on collections. We focused on our renters insurance, vendor compliance, some of those things to make sure that we were setting up a good, strong foundation, as well as a learning management platform, setting up policies and procedures. So right out of the gate, we set up just generic policies and procedures that we purchased. And then about a year later, when we actually had time to go back and document the way that we do business at WW Co., then we went back and did that. But it's just constantly prioritizing, keeping a moving list, and then making sure when I actually had a team that you could assign those things out and keep things under control.
So you mentioned when you actually had a team. So it sounded like in the beginning, this was you in a bedroom trying to put everything together. Fair assessment, it sounds like, as I'm seeing the head nod a little bit.
There were a handful of us. So there was somebody that was in IT that had already been was hired right around the time I was, somebody in accounting. And then I had an operator that had worked for Western Wealth Capital in the capacity of an asset manager, but his background really was a regional manager in the multifamily side. So whenever we were bringing management in-house, he converted over and joined the property management company. But really, it was a tight group of about 4 of us that were doing the heavy lifting. And, there was no time. So when you knew you had to get properties onboarded in 28 days, there really wasn't time to interview at that point. So once we got those properties up and running, then I started focusing on people. and prioritizing again on who I needed to bring on and in what order. And one of the first things that we focused on was we're a people first company, right? And many companies in our industry are going to say the same thing. It's all about the people, but we really put a large investment into that. And one of my very first hires was my director of recruiting. So making sure I knew if I was going to be scaling, which in the height of what we did over these last 3 years, we onboarded 62 properties and it's about 17,000 units. That means there's a lot of people that need to be hired at that time. So hiring that director of recruiting was critical to set us up for success and make sure that we could have a pipeline of talent that was waiting to join our organization.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that struck me when I heard the story and I thought back to our own is, we didn't grow as fast on that because we didn't have the right talent. We weren't willing to settle. So that was one of the questions I want to ask you is like, how did you balance that need for, I'm going to sound like Top Gun, that need for speed with not settling for a subset of performance that might come from hiring a 5 instead of a 7 that you can coach into a 9?
Yep, I was very fortunate. So to me, it's always been really critical when you're hiring people. It's the most important thing that you can possibly do for your organization. So when I lean into hiring somebody, I put my full effort into it. And one thing throughout my career that I've really been successful in is utilizing social media to find your next group of talent. So utilizing your network and your network's network to find those right people. So as I was posting things out on social, received quite a few people that were recommendations from others, a couple of people that I had worked with in the past, and just really spent the time on the front end interviewing. And I think it's really important to tell people, especially in a startup, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So somebody that maybe I've worked with in the past that's worked for a very stable organization for 20 years of their career, it might be too much to rock the boat and join a startup. And so what I found is that, not everybody is cut out for a startup. It really takes a unique individual that wants to give a certain amount to an organization. And understanding too that, you're walking into something that you get to build it. Right. And a lot of people love that too, right? Sometimes people want to walk into an organization and have structure and everything ready and done for them, where they access the policy manual. They know exactly where to go to get the answers that they need. And then there's other people like myself that really thrive on the newness and having the opportunity to put your mark on something and build it from scratch. And so those were the types of people that I was really looking for that could handle the fast pace, could really handle the uncertainty, and being able to make decisions quickly and then move forward.
So you've touched on a couple different things that I would both put under kind of the culture bucket. You'd mentioned having a people first culture, and if you go on your website at all, it's literally everywhere that you guys that's being reset. And then you also said kind of I'll go to an old book, the Who Moved My Cheese, it's Sniff and Scurry. Let's go make this stuff happen, not hem and haw. But how, especially in the beginning, when everyone was trying to figure out just how we were going to interact with each other, how did you go about setting that culture within an organization of brand new everybody, which is, as you put, is great. You get to put your mark on it, but you got to go put your mark on it. How'd you approach that? And what were some of the key kind of, maybe not landmines, maybe demarcation points you're like, oh, this is working?
Absolutely. So one of the things we did right out of the gate, and we were pushed into it because of COVID, and it ended up becoming the foundation of our culture, is our weekly teams, all employee meetings. So we did video calls every Friday afternoon to just kind of reset from the week and talk about any updates to the company. With COVID going on, we were talking about what was our strategy moving forward, what was open, what was closed, how are we handling tours, what did that process look like? But it also allowed us to really celebrate our wins. And one thing that became part of our culture is we always ended those calls with shout outs. So allowing peer-to-peer recognition. So if I saw you doing something amazing this week, Andrew, I would shout you out on that team call. And people weren't shy and they weren't nervous to speak up. I think because we started small with 10 properties and we had probably about 50 employees, And then everybody was excited as we were growing because you're seeing the call get bigger and bigger, and you see hundreds and hundreds of employees on this call becoming part of the culture. So it was certainly, I was able to set the environment for the culture, but the employees are the ones who dictate what the culture actually feels like and looks like moving forward. And those all hands team calls really allowed us to do that. The only change we've made to that is we still to this day do those calls on Fridays, but we've changed them to biweekly. It was a call that I used to host probably for the first year or year and a half. And now I've given the reins to others. So we have different volunteers that lead those calls every 2 weeks. Sometimes we pick what a topic will be, and then other times we let somebody decide what it is that they want to present on. And I think it's been a great exposure to the entire company to see different styles of leadership, different education that they can receive based on the employees that we have.
Interesting. So actually one of the reasons I'm in the office today of all days is we had our all employees town hall that our executives lead. We only do it on a monthly basis. At 17,000 units, that biweekly call, is that truly all hands? I mean, are we bringing maintenance on that call? Everybody on that?
Yeah, maintenance is invited. Now, if they're out on emergency calls or doing something they may miss, but we ask the managers to bring the entire team into the office, turn the camera on, and sit so everybody hears the same information and gets to share in the same feedback. I think something right out of the gate, too, is, we really understood that if you're going to say you're a people first culture, your actions need to match your words. And so we celebrate everything, right? We celebrate anniversaries. We celebrated our birthday as a company, and we continue to do that. We celebrate people's anniversaries. And then we have various days that we celebrate. So Accounting Appreciation Day, AP Appreciation Day, all of those things so people can have their moment and feel appreciated.
So it's interesting when you talk about being people first and that appreciation, this is actually one of the characteristics of you personally that first stuck out to me. So this has to be, gosh, Jennifer, at least 12 years ago at this point. I remember going to a management company meeting for the company you were working for at the time. It was out in Phoenix. And you were the one who was coordinating the entire production of it, everything else. And it just had a completely different feel. It had a focus on the mental health of your employees. It had a focus on the physical health of your employees. It had a focus on the relational health of the employees and the guests, including me as a vendor, as a partner at that one. How has that played through your career? Because obviously you put that front and center. How is that personal health and that mindfulness and beyond just your own personal journey, how has that played out throughout your career, and how do you put it together now in Western Wealth?
Absolutely. So to me, it's been very important to me, and I think it's been really life-changing. So when I started practicing yoga, it was probably 12 years ago or so, it's something that I say changed my life because you can oftentimes in this industry allow stress to get to you, and you need to have an outlet. And so yoga was an amazing outlet to me. And then I started getting into meditation, and I meditate twice a day when I wake up first thing and then right before I go to bed, again, to ground me. Reading different passages. There's something that I live and die by is the daily Stoic. So I read that passage out of the book every morning, and I read the email. So you get a separate email if you sign up for it as well. And so I read both of those, and it's really amazing, Andrew, that there's certain mornings, and it can change every year, right? This morning I can read a passage and it just speaks to me on that day. Maybe 2 years ago when I read that same passage, it didn't speak to me, but this year it really spoke to me. And it's something that I really utilize from a leadership perspective when we're dealing with a challenge or something difficult. I always go back to the daily Stoic and get that passage and send it out to my team and put some context around it to really understand what we're going through. It's only temporary, and there's a challenge that we need to face. But for me, I think it starts first with me, and then also understanding when you're at, for instance, a leadership conference or an industry conference, it's so packed with content that there's so little time to spend on yourself. And so when I was planning meetings for the two management companies that I worked for previous to this, I always made sure to put time in for exercise. So be it yoga, a 5K, some kind of activity, a hike, whatever, because people want to work out when they're on the road, but they feel like they can't because there's no time. And so when we created the time and the space to do that, people were really appreciative of it.
I mean, obviously I make it no secret that health and wellness, especially on the physical side, is a big part of me. And it's funny, the Daily Stoic, and actually mine started with The Obstacle is the Way. Both, by the way, for those who are listening, wanting that Ryan Halliday is the author of both of those. But yeah, I'm a huge Daily Stoic of it, and the fact that it's, this too shall pass for that hard stuff, but also remembering so will the good stuff. Like it's not always going to be the good stuff that's on there. But yeah, it just struck me when I went to that. And I guess it was 11 years ago or so that I went to. If you started practicing yoga 12 years ago, this was probably 11 years ago that this happened. That it was the first time I'd seen a company truly dedicate time to more than just the lip service of, hey, we want you to be healthy and wealthy and wise in all ways. And I've seen that throughout. So you mentioned the Daily Stoic on a daily basis. You mentioned the meditation in the morning and in the evening. You've got me completely beat on that. I'm new life goals. What does your morning look like? I would imagine you, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I would imagine you're probably kind of, this is the way I get my day started so that I'm grounded the right way. What does it look like for you?
It's a complete routine for me. The only variable is I either wake up at 4:30 or 5, depending on what I have going for the day. And then I get up and I drink a glass of water, I think, which is really important. It kickstarts your metabolism. I meditate. I do yoga. And sometimes yoga can be 15 minutes and sometimes it can be an hour, which is what I prefer. But there's not always time for that in the day. I read the Daily Stoic, email and book, and then I have some news that I read every morning. I read the LinkedIn Daily Rundown, I read the Skim, I read Morning Brew, and I read the New York Times highlights of the morning. And that's really how I start my day without fail. If I don't get a chance to do those, I definitely feel off. And I'm very much a person of habit and routine as it relates to that.
Yeah, I've come and gone with different morning routines, and there's certain things that have always stuck around, but the vast majority of the folks that I see are successful in these leadership roles have that morning routine that's specific to them and keeps them grounded. It doesn't have to be kind of everything you just mentioned, but so let's share a little bit about your story. So you mentioned you were with two other groups beforehand. I was reading on your bio, a couple different things, obviously went through LinkedIn, et cetera. How did you get started in the industry? Because I think that one of the stories I want to come out of this is the unique path that can be copied by others. Of you don't have to have one particular path to get to a point of leadership within our industry.
Absolutely. So I started out thinking that this was a temporary job.
We all did.
I was going back to graduate school, and I thought this is just going to get me through till I'm done with graduate school, and then I will move on. So I saw a flyer in the elevator of the building where I lived, the apartment building where I lived, and they were looking for fun, enthusiastic people that wanted to save money on their rent. And again, I had just quit my job in pharmaceutical research and was going back to graduate school for international business. And I thought, well, this came at the perfect time. I live here, I could save money on my rent, and I would have a flexible schedule. So I went down to the leasing office, applied for the role, and was hired on the spot. And it allowed me, I was going to graduate school at nighttime. Okay. So it gave me the flexibility to work 4 days during the week and every other weekend. So I had a day off during the week to be able to study and prep for school and still get through my graduate school. So what I thought was going to be something temporary turned into, well, you're doing really good in leasing. Why don't we try you as an assistant manager and a manager? And so I worked on site for about a year, I guess it was, and a training role came available. And my manager at the time reached out and said, I really think you would be good at this role. You have such a good way with people. And I never thought anything of it, but I thought, well, if she thinks she sees that in me, I might as well apply for the role. And I applied for it and was awarded the role. And the gentleman that I worked for at that time then, he definitely took a chance on me. I had very little experience, worked a year on site, and here I was to be training managers, assistants, maintenance, leasing, et cetera, how to do their jobs, and just really became passionate about it. Then the woman, actually it was a woman I was working for, she was over training and marketing, and was thinking of her boss, who I eventually ended up working for a long time. She ended up leaving to stay home with her children, and her boss, who became my boss, said, I really think you should take over the marketing too. Would you be willing to do that? Sure, why not? And just, raising your hand and volunteering for things and putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, I think is what led to my path. So I became training, I got into marketing. And then when I got into a national role at the first management company that I worked for, we were getting ready to roll out revenue management. And so again, I raised my hand, walked into my boss's office and said, I want to take this over. I really think that there's synergy between marketing and training and pricing, and I think it best resides here. And my boss at the time was like, absolutely. It was one less thing or one less person that he had to supervise. And he understood that it could be a successful synergy. So I think it just became, and then I ended up finishing grad school long before that. It took me maybe a year and a half and just never left. I got promoted so many times and found my passion and loved what I was doing, and just never left the industry, and definitely no looking back.
So a couple things that surprised me and I didn't know about in this. I'd love to hear how a person with a degree in French got into pharmaceutical research. Like that's an interesting transition.
It's called a job, right? So when I was graduating college, so being a French major, I studied abroad my junior year in France. And when I was there, I guess it was in my first semester of my junior year, I thought I was going to school outside of Philadelphia. And I'm like, gosh, I've lived overseas now. I really can't see going back to the university I was at and finishing up school. So I applied to a program called the Washington Center in Washington, D.C., and was accepted into that program. And it basically brings people from all over the world and opens up opportunities to basically intern for a semester in DC. And so I had the opportunity to interview at Voice of America, the French Embassy, the American Embassy, the Canadian Embassy, and also this company called Advance International, which was a small international business organization, but it was owned by a Frenchman. And when I had the opportunity to interview with him, I thought going into it, I wanted to work for one of the embassies or do something like that. And the minute I met this gentleman, and I knew I was going to have hands-on experience because it was a shop of maybe 6 or 7 people, and every single person was from a different country around the world. And I knew that was going to be the opportunity. Instead of working at an embassy and making copies and getting coffee, I was actually going to be doing the work. And so took that role. And I had known from a really young age that I always loved Washington, D.C. And after college, I knew that's where I wanted to live. And so I was graduating college, and, being a French major, it's not necessarily the easiest way to get a job when you don't have experience. But I found this job at a pharmaceutical company and took the job so I could get in D.C. It's a lot easier to be able to figure out your next step if you're at least in the location where you want to be. So that's what led me there. It was never really something that I studied or wanted to do, but it was a job that paid the bills and allowed me to live in the city where I wanted to.
Well, as someone who proudly has an aquatic biology degree, I fully embrace the this is a job and I'll actually get paid approach to that.
Right.
You mentioned, as you were talking about both raising your hand and saying, "Hey, I'm willing," and also, coming from a degree that. I'm sure you can still be fluent and have conversations in French, but I would also imagine it doesn't have a lot of applicability in multifamily these days. How, if at all, have you dealt with the potential of imposter syndrome? It's something I talk with folks all the time about is, well, I can't because, and I don't feel like I'm worthy of. And candidly, in the rooms that, I first met you in, I did not feel worthy to go in those rooms. I'm just going to perfectly own that from an imposter perspective. I felt like I was, everyone knew that I didn't have the experience to be in that room, et cetera, with everything else. How or what advice would you give folks that might be earlier on in their career that are thinking they want to do that same thing, that are a little bit afraid of raising their hand because, oh my gosh, what if I don't know that?
Mm-hmm. I think it's okay, right? There's so much stuff that I don't know. And I think when I really think about imposter syndrome, it was stepping into this role that I'm in currently, where I'm the president of a management company. I was setting up a management company from scratch. And there were so many things that I didn't have exposure to or didn't have experience doing, but that's okay. And, you can't let the voice inside your head get in the way of moving forward and having success. So it's really important. And I think the advice I would give is building a really strong network of people that you can call when you have questions. So something that I think I really took advantage of is up until the point when I joined Western Wealth, I was probably being asked for more favors, and I was always willing to give information, to share, to do whatever I could to help other people. And it paid itself back tenfold, because when I came into this new role and really needed help in a short amount of time setting up a management company, I was able to tap into those people that maybe I had helped in the past, and they were able to help me. So I think it's very important to build a strong network and not be afraid to ask your network the questions that you need answered, and always be willing to reciprocate and share. So if you're asking for, what does your delinquency look like in the submarket of Dallas, or what does your occupancy look like, be willing to share that same information back, because people are more willing to share if they know that you're also going to be open and transparent. But yeah, with imposter syndrome, it happens all the time, right? And I think too, even when I was getting into speaking a lot at conferences before podcasts and webcasts became a thing, it's understanding what you are an expert at, and don't just accept any speaking engagement. Accept the things that you're passionate about and that you are somewhat of an expert about, and make your name known there. And then continue to learn and grow and expand and teach yourself new things, so then you can speak on other things, but really master what you have in front of you first before you start reaching out to other things.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that approach and that idea. So thank you for sharing that. You also said a couple things in there that made my mind go down a couple different tangent paths, et cetera. So we're going to get into a little bit of, you said conference, so we're going to use a conference buzzword bingo game almost. But you also mentioned that, you knew when you went in to become the president of Western Wealth that there were certain things you just didn't know, weren't exposed to, had asked that. You and I both came through the property management ranks relatively traditionally. You started as a leasing agent, I started as a leasing manager, but we worked our way into assistant community manager roles, and those roles were exposed to basically all aspects of running a property. In today's world of the word everybody uses, centralization, I tend to use specialization, because I think most of the centralization models are actually decentralized if you actually look at them. How do you, as a leader of an organization, think about that pipeline of leadership that we all have to build in our organizations? If that traditional model of, hey, I'm going to expose you to everything at the property is no longer happening at the property, how as a people first organization are you thinking about developing the next generation of leaders?
Absolutely. Great question. And so we actually name it within Western Wealth enhanced services instead of centralization. So we think about, what are the things, what's the noise that's caused on site that we can take off of the on-site employees. So, and also the other thing we talk a lot about is, where is there leakage? So where are there fees not being charged, things not being done properly that need to be audited? Those are the low-hanging fruit that we're taking off of the on-site teams to ensure that whatever the resident signs in the lease is actually getting charged in the property management software. So those are the things we've really focused on. So I know some companies have approached it more from a leasing perspective first. We decided to go the admin approach and think about, we now handle centrally or through enhanced services, all the move-ins, the move-outs. And then when we have a move-out, we file our claims through our security deposit insurance to make sure that we're seeing from beginning to end the money that's coming in and that's available to the properties. really focusing on renewals and centralizing that function to make sure all of the batches are getting completed and they're being sent out, and making sure all the documents are being done. Looking at pending applications, the list goes on, but we basically narrowed it down to about 10 different tasks and functions that we thought had the most priority, where we could find money for the properties and take the noise off of the property to allow them to focus on the customer, either the future customer or the existing customer, by holding events on site, by reaching out and following up on all of their maintenance requests as they are completed, that type of thing. And then ensuring the leasing process is handled from beginning to end with follow-up, and making sure that we're doing everything possible to convert that lease.
So I get the specialization, that enhanced services aspect of it. Mm-hmm. As you're saying, the noise that's on the property level for the next generation of like regional managers and stuff, are we now basically saying, hey, we've got other people that handle the noise, and I've got teams over there and I'm developing them, and they've got their own sets of leaders and everything else. And as the next generation of on-site leaders and regional leaders, you don't need to worry about that? Or is there a way that you're exposing them to what's happening over there and the impact it can have on the sites?
Yeah, so they still need to be involved. And I think that's some of the myth, right, with centralization or even our enhanced services. So when we take some of those tasks off the site, we still need input from the manager. So if we're moving somebody out, if somebody's sitting in Phoenix, sure, they can hit the move out button, but if they don't have the pictures or the backup of how the apartment was left and the context of the story, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good. So the manager's still being engaged, but some of the actual admin task is taken off their plate, and some of the time-consuming tasks are being taken off of their plate. And I think it really allows the regional managers to focus and be more hands-on with their managers and their entire teams to make sure. One of our managers told us when she rolled to enhanced services, she now has the time to sit down and have her full daily huddles with her maintenance team to follow up on all of the outstanding service requests and come up with real solutions on what's happening instead of just band-aiding things moving forward. Awesome. So I think it does allow the regional manager to spend more time with the people by developing them and giving them the skills to continue on. I think our next tackling will be on the maintenance side, and then we will ultimately focus on leasing. Why I've been more hesitant to focus on leasing is our business model is pretty much centered around value add. And so value add to me is very much like a lease up, and people still need to see that. When they're moving into a brand new building, or even when they're moving into one of our buildings that we've renovated, you can take a look at pictures on the website, but we also need to be able to sell you the entire picture of what's going to happen and what the transformation will look like. So to us, we've really focused on putting leasing last, being able to centralize some of the follow-up and some of the maintenance that is taking place, but really focus more on the admin tasks first.
So since you're talking about the centralization of leasing and you're talking about centralization of maintenance, what often goes hand in hand with that conversation is automation and artificial intelligence at the various different stages. What, obviously, tech company, we'll raise our hands like, we're guilty. What areas of your business are you looking seriously at? Where does automation and artificial intelligence play into this? Where do you think it doesn't necessarily? And I realize you're not an AI expert. I'm not asking for that. But when you're thinking about as a people for business, where are you looking at where those enhancements can happen?
Yeah, so places that we've already focused on AI and automation is lead nurturing through automation. And something that we just rolled out recently is a partnership where we take a voice bot that's answering the calls, right, that come through. The voice bot is then, what we found was when we rolled out a voice bot originally, we had a really hard time with the handoff from voice to the human. And so the voice bot was doing a great job answering these calls, but then when they got stumped and it needed to get handed over to somebody else, that's where there was fall off. And so we've been able to work with our lead nurturing company to build an integration between the voice bot to the lead nurturing. And then in cases where we have the social component to it, we're also able to connect them to a current resident to share their experience at the site. So then we can really have that full beginning to end and have that conversion of lease go up. So that's something that we've really focused on. I think where we got it wrong at first is we were working in silos and rolling out, 3 separate products that didn't speak to each other. And I think another myth in the industry is that our vendor partners don't want to play nice together. That can be further from the truth. And especially when you come with some of these brand new startups, they're finding a way. They want to find a way to get their foothold in these companies. And so they will absolutely play nice with other supplier partners that you have. And once you're able to really prove out the case of what we're doing with VoiceBot to lead nurturing to social, they can go then sell that to other customers. We've done the heavy lifting and created some of that, some of the ideas to make it happen, but they can then market that to other customers to give them an end-to-end solution.
So
something else on the AI front, was we've also focused on the collections. And so I think many people throughout COVID experience residents paying a lot slower or trying to not pay at all, hoping to get assistance. And so we rolled out some AI to be able to communicate with our residents better and increase collections. And so we did a pilot with a company. And in the first 90 days, we took the ending balance at the end of the prior month before we rolled out the AI. And then at the end of 90 days, and we saw 35% improvement in collections, just putting AI in place. The majority of those conversations can be handled by a bot. There are times, so we basically train our assistant managers that platform needs to stay open on their computer. If messages come through that the bot is unable to answer, then it defaults over to the assistant. But the assistants then found that they were able to get open communication with residents that habitually paid late, but just didn't want to tell they didn't want to speak to somebody and tell them, I'm really having a hard time paying my rent. If they could just text the answer, they were much more open and willing to share that and get the answer back.
Well, I mean, that's amazing, number one. But number two, even the whole thought of, texting versus phone call versus coming in, et cetera. My kids aren't even kids anymore. They're 23 and 21. And they had an issue recently where I'm like, well, call the office. They're like, I don't want to talk to anybody. Like they literally don't want to talk, but they're more than happy to interact with the bot. So I want to respect your time. We're coming up towards the end of this, and I've got one curveball question that we kind of hadn't discussed, but you brought it up over and over and over again. So I want to dig into this. In your mind, as a leader of an organization, what's the role of social media as a leader? Because you're relatively involved with it, and I would say that you are one of, not necessarily an outlier, but there's definitely a spectrum. But you've mentioned several times that you really use it as a tool. How do you view it? What's JStack's kind of just mentality around what to use and how to use it as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, it's not oversharing, right? But celebrating success. So to me, whenever we have a real win, or if it's something where we're doing good and it's part of our core of what we really are about, I want to share that. And so, one thing we didn't talk about, and I probably should have mentioned when we were talking about wellness and mental health, is I think another component to that is not only the physical and the emotional side, but also the giving back. Yeah. And one thing that has always been very important to me from growing up, my parents instilled it in me, is to give back and volunteer. And it's been something that I have also been able to do throughout the organizations that I've worked for, both of the management companies prior to Western Wealth. And one of the things that drew me to Western Wealth was we have 2 annual events that as the owner of the company, they did and asked the former management companies to roll out. It's their We've Got Your Back events, which is our backpack event to set children up for school with success. And then our rent-free Christmas, where we gift free rent to one family or one resident at all of our communities in December. And so I think those are the types of things that you want to share, right? What are the ways that we give back? Because sometimes there's a mentality of what a landlord is or isn't. Within our industry, we all know that landlords have the best intent and they want to provide a superior home for the residents, but the media doesn't always portray it that way. And we really try and show that we're not just collecting rent, that we're also doing good and we're trying to transform and change the neighborhoods where we work. And by giving back through We've Got Your Back or Rent-Free Christmas or other ways that we volunteer in the communities where we live and work, I think really goes to show that story.
And I want to build on that a little bit because I was reading those stories on your website. I was doing all my research, and I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to get to it as well. One of the things that, again, goes to building that people first culture that you have is, it's give your back. Is that what we got your back, right?
We've
got your back part. The part that struck me was we're not just buying backpacks and stuff and ordering them from, wherever and having them delivered. Your teams are actually putting them together. So they've got that physical touch, that physical ownership, and the physical gift. And if I read it correctly, the free Christmas or the free rent at Christmas, the site team is nominating the family that they actually believe could get the most benefit out of being able to, instead of paying rent, direct that into the experience of the holiday experience for their family. So again, I didn't want to let that go because I thought it was really a big kudos of like, okay, that's getting teams involved. That's building a people first culture and organization.
And to take it one step further on that too, with Rent-Free Christmas, the teams all nominate a family or a resident, and then they're gifted the free rent. Because honestly, it's many times our maintenance teams that know better than anybody who's really struggling. They're going into apartment homes and seeing if there's maybe just an air mattress or there's no food or whatever it may be. The office knows if we have people that have been battling cancer or battling some kind of issue in their life. And they remember those things. But then what we do is we take all of those stories from all of the properties and we send a survey out to all of our employees and allow them to vote on the top 10 stories. Normally we pick maybe 2 for Phoenix and 2 for Dallas in various markets. And then we gift them the full Christmas experience as well. So we spend anywhere from $750 to $1,000 to get their wish list for Christmas gifts. If they need a tree and decorations, if they need the Christmas dinner, whatever it may be, that's going to really allow them to have that experience for their family, we do that. And then we bring that family into the office. We try and come up with a good disguise for why they need to come in and meet with us. And we surprise them with that. And it really is life-changing to those families. But what I will tell you is they're normally overcome with emotion. But our teams are equally overcome with emotion because it feels good to give back. And we know that these families are in dire need. And when we're able to do that for them, that's what really provides meaning and value to us.
That's awesome. Okay, so you've been very generous with your time, but I do have 2 questions I want to follow up and finish off with. Mm-hmm. The first one, obviously, again, tech company, we're guilty of this. As someone who's out there exposed, and I can only imagine the number of emails that you get on a daily basis from vendors of like, hey, I'd love to pitch you this. Generally, what tech out there has you the most excited about, wow, this has real possibility? Like just in a general category, which one gets you the most excited, whether you implemented it or not?
Yeah, so I think right now, even though we're already doing automation and AI, I think it's what's the next step in automation and AI. And, my head of systems and technology was actually asking me last week. He said, I think there's ways within our corporate environment that we can utilize AI. And so he's really focusing on finding those solutions to make that happen. So again, it's not to reduce the amount of staff, but it's to better use staff to focus on higher value tasks and projects. That to me is what gets me really excited to see what the future holds. But one thing I would say with any tech, so I take a lot of meetings.
Yes, you do.
I take a ton of meetings because I do want to see what's out there. But there has to be, the only way I will take a meeting is if the product is going to solve a problem that I'm currently facing in my organization. So I'm not going to chase tech just to do the shiny new penny. I'm chasing tech to figure out how can I better run my organization and impact the bottom line. And so it really has to, solve that problem. And I think it's really important for salespeople to understand the company that they're calling into first. to spend some time and do a little research and understand what's important to that company and how you can best communicate with them to actually get the meeting. Because I will tell you, I'll take the meeting, but I'm not taking every meeting.
Yeah, no. And believe me, this is a soapbox I could get on and go for a while. I literally got an email earlier today. Like, salespeople, if you hear nothing else, scrub your email lists. I got an email earlier today for a service that, as a vendor in the space, I clearly can't use. And the name that was at the top was one of our product names. So it's directed to me, says, hi, literally product name. I'm just like, no one's paying attention to this whatsoever. So if I could give one lesson to all the salespeople, please scrub your lists, please. So last question, and I'm probably going to take away your easy answer, because we've already talked about one book already in depth. So one of the things I've asked all the leaders on here is, what if you could go back and recommend one book on business to someone who's looking to build their career within multifamily, other than the Daily Stoic for you? What would that book be? What would your recommendation be?
I will recommend all of the Ryan Holiday books, but for this one, because I can only give one, Stillness is the Key. It's something that I struggle with every single day. I always want to be busy and be active and responding to things and being there. And Stillness is the Key is something that I work on every single day, that you don't always have to be busy and active. Sometimes you need to take the space to have a moment to compile your thoughts and then come up with your strategy to move forward.
Great recommendation. Actually, I'm going to be fully transparent. That's one I haven't read because I do have an issue with stillness. Like, I'm not good sitting in one spot. So I guess I've avoided that one. So now I've got to go get that one.
It's really good.
I'm sure it is. Jennifer, thank you so much for all of your time and for sharing both the Western Wealth experience and your experience. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can do it again in a few months. We've got some more to talk about.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Multifamily Talks, a Real Page podcast. As always, the views expressed are those of the individuals participating and not those of Real Page.